Welcome to the Texture Overlay Tips and Tricks video tutorial from MCPActions.com. If you've recently purchased the brand new MCP Texture Play Overlay Collection, now available at www.mcpactions.com, a PDF has been included in your purchase walking you through the tips and tricks we're about to review. If you have not done so already, please visit mcpactions.com and review the first two video tutorials in this series so that you will have a better understanding of the tips and tricks we are about to review on applying textures in Photoshop and Elements. In this video tutorial, we will review 3 tips and tricks that will help you incorporate texture application into your workflow seamlessly and effortlessly. The first tip and trick that we are going to review in this video tutorial is the combination of actions and textures. Actions and textures can be used together in both Photoshop and Elements. They can be used at any time in your workflow. It's up to your preference. The key is to pay attention to the layer order so that your layers do not negatively impact your image. Beginners may feel safer to flatten the image before switching between actions and textures to make sure that the layer order is correct. Advanced users with extensive knowledge of layer order can work without flattening, just making sure that the layers are stacked properly. Let's take a look and see what that exactly means. I have an image here in which I applied 2 textures and followed up with an action. I used Lemonade Stand from MCP Fusion, which also runs one-click color all in one easy step. I've made minor adjustments to each of these layers, adjusting opacity as I need. But I would like to include my textures underneath my actions so that the textures also take on the tones of the actions I've played and applied to my image. You'll see if I select these 2 layers here and drag them underneath my action, there's some big impacts made to my image. Some may prefer to leave your textures on top as a last step process. Some may choose to apply your textures and then your actions afterwards. It's all up to you. It's a matter of making sure that your layers are properly stacked so that the effect that you're looking for is achieved. There are some actions that contain layers that actually affect the pixels of an image, such as one click. If you see here, in these actual little panes, here you can see the actual image. That means that that action is actually pulling and adjusting actual pixels. It's not what you would consider overlaid on top of the image. So if we go ahead and we make adjustments to just this portion of the action, with it being on top of our textures, it has a very different effect than if we had it underneath our texture and made adjustments. You can see how it all affects where your layers are placed. Some actions such as eye fixers, skin fixers, if they're not placed in the proper layer order, you may run into some issues where you have some wandering eyes on screen, some skin that looks out of place. So it's all about making sure that these layers are all cohesive. There are some rules of thumb. Some is mainly just your preference. Go ahead and have some fun mixing your actions and your textures. A side note, little tip and trick that you should remember, especially when working with textures and actions and combining the 2, is to use your history functions. In Photoshop, you can go right into your history palette and click your snapshot button. This will go ahead and capture your image in your document at a certain point in time. So you'll see here, by default, there is a snapshot of my original image. Now I've also taken a snapshot of my textures applied to my image so that if I went ahead and ran these actions and something went completely wrong, I would not have to start over. I could step back to just my textures with my image. In Photoshop Elements, it's not quite as easy. There is no snapshot button as of the date that when this video is created. They may, and hopefully in the future, create a snapshot selection. For now, it's best if you are a beginner, if you are leery about what's going to happen to your document and your textures before or after you run an action, go ahead and save a PSD file in Photoshop Elements so that you have something to revert back to, that if something goes a little wonky, you won't have lost all of your work completely. You can step back to right before something went wrong. So don't forget, go ahead and use those history functions. Go ahead and keep copies until you get the hang of mixing and matching actions and textures, and until you get the hang of layer order. For our second tip and trick portion of this video tutorial, we're going to show you how to remove all the texture from your texture, but keep the color that it's applying to your image. If you want to keep the color toning, but reduce or remove the lines and marks of the texture, there's a quick and easy way to do that. With my texture already applied and my texture layer selected, I head to Filter, and I go down to my blur options, and I'm going to go with Gaussian Blur. Once the dialog box appears, we're going to go ahead and increase this slider to about an 85. You'll see here that the color tone is applied to my image, but all the texture has been quickly removed. So I'm keeping the berry color, but removing the grungy texture. If I click OK, you can see with and without my texture applied, the color effects are there, but the texture is taken away. Quick and easy. For the third and final tip and trick portion of this video tutorial, we are going to show you an alternate method of removing texture from areas of your photo where you would like it removed. But in this instance, we're going to remove that texture, but keep the color tone that the texture is applying to the image. If we follow along with the first video tutorial in this series, applying textures to images in Photoshop and Elements, we would go ahead and add a layer mask to our texture, grab a soft black brush, adjusting to a medium to high opacity, and we would begin to paint on our subject to remove the texture. You'll see here in this instance, the color tone has been taken away from my subject because I've removed the texture. In some instances, this may be fine. In this instance, I want to keep the tone on my subject's skin, but remove all of the texture. Let's go ahead and take a quick step back so we can demonstrate the alternate method of removing texture from portions of your image without losing color tone. The first step to using this trick is to take a look inside your layers palette. Take a look at your texture layer, and if you see this image right here, this tiny icon, means that your layer needs to be rasterized before you can proceed. If we don't rasterize our texture, this trick won't work. We can either rasterize by right-clicking in our layer and selecting Rasterize Layer, or you can head to your layer options up here and click Rasterize Smart Object. Now that our layer is rasterized, we're ready to proceed. Our next step is very important. We're going to tell Photoshop what color we want to use to make this texture disappear. With your texture layer selected, we're going to head over to our Tools palette and select our eyedropper tool. Once we select, we will see up top here in our menu that there are quite a few options for us to choose from. We're going to go ahead and make sure that our sample size is selected on either 5x5 average or 11x11 average. If you have both options, it's recommended that you use 11x11 average. We also want to make sure that our sample drop-down is selected to current layer, and I like to see my sample ring, so I'm going to make sure that that's selected. Now that our menus are all set the way we need them, we're going to take this eyedropper tool and select an area close to our subject's skin or close to the area that we want to remove the texture. With a simple left click of the mouse, you will see that sampling ring has appeared. And if you look down here in your color palette, you'll see that Photoshop has selected that color in that range and placed it here in our color palette. So when we go ahead to our next step, which is selecting a soft brush at varying opacities, it will apply that color that's selected here in our foreground. I'm going to go up with a medium to low opacity brush. I'm going to adjust its size just a bit here, and I'm going to go ahead and paint right on my texture in its texture layer, right onto my subject's skin. I may want to remove it from his hair, possibly his clothing. I'm going to now adjust my opacity because I want my texture to appear seamless. I don't want it to drastically drop off. So I'll just paint so there's no halo effect. And now I'm done removing that texture from my subject, but I was able to keep the tone of the texture. If I zoom in here, you'll see that there is no more texture on my subject, but the color tone still remains. There is no harsh change from my subject to my background with a drop off of color. It's completely seamless and ready to go. We thank you for watching this video tutorial from mcpactions.com. We hope that you have learned and benefited from this 3-part series on texture application. Be sure to stop by www.mcpactions.com to pick up your copy of the all-new MCP Texture Play Overlay Collection, now available for purchase, as well as the MCP Texture Application Plus action set that is free from mcpactions.com.